My name is Gillian Foster. I am 60 years old, and at 5:39 a.m. on a Tuesday, one text message from my only son proved that 30 years of sacrifice could be erased in exactly 10 seconds. I was standing in my Seattle kitchen gripping a mug of black coffee in the damp morning chill when my phone vibrated on the counter. It was a message from my son, the same boy I had raised alone since he was 5, back when his father vanished and left me with nothing but a crumbling woodworking shop and a mountain of debt. I worked 70 hours a week to turn that ruin into a craft furniture empire just to give him everything. The message read, "Don't come to the airport, Mom. Plans for the Maui trip changed. Harriet said this is her family's vacation now and you just feel out of place there. Her parents are taking your seat instead." I read those words 3 times. It wasn't an apology, it was an eviction. Dominic didn't call. He didn't explain. He simply chose to side with his new wife and treat the mother who mortgaged her own home for his tuition like an unwanted ghost. My decades of devotion had officially become an inconvenience. I set my coffee down. My hands didn't shake. A coldness sharper than a Seattle winter settled over me. They wanted a private family vacation funded by my sweat and blood fine. I was about to give them exactly the kind of privacy they never saw coming. My story is just beginning. If you want to see how a single mother reclaims her dignity when pushed to the edge, hit subscribe and turn on notifications now. You won't want to miss what I did at exactly 12:15 p.m. that afternoon. The hum of the industrial fans in my woodworking shop usually felt like a lullaby, but today the air inside my private office was thick with a suffocating stillness. I sat behind my mahogany desk, the very first piece I ever crafted with my own hands, and opened my laptop. Only 3 months ago, I had sold 60% of my company's shares, envisioning a retirement filled with family laughter and the white sands of Maui. I had built this empire from sawdust and splinters so that Dominic would never have to know the hunger I felt in my 20s. But as the login screen for my American Express Platinum account flickered to life, the warmth of those memories evaporated. My eyes skipped past my own expenditures and locked onto the section labeled Authorized Users. Beneath Dominic's name was a secondary card I had issued to his new wife, Harriet Sterling. I had welcomed Harriet into this family with open arms, believing her sharp wit was a sign of ambition. I never imagined she was using that sharpness to bleed me dry. I clicked on the Pending Transactions tab and my breath hitched. There it was, dated just 48 hours ago, a staggering charge of $8,700 from a high-end designer boutique in downtown Seattle. Attached to the digital receipt was a memo Harriet had carelessly typed, "Vacation look, Maui." My pulse hammered against my temples as I scrolled further. The luxury beachfront villa I had booked for the entire family, $30,000 fully prepaid. The 5 first-class round-trip tickets, another $12,000. I realized with a sickening jolt that even the private family dinner scheduled for their first night was already charged to my account. I pulled up the last 3 months of statements. It wasn't just the trip. There were charges for organic grocery deliveries to their apartment premium gym memberships, and even a monthly detailing service for the SUV I had bought for Dominic's birthday. I had been so focused on finalizing the sale of my business that I hadn't looked at a single statement trusting my son to manage the family expenses. Instead, he had handed the keys to my vault to a woman who saw me as nothing more than a bottomless ATM. The betrayal shifted from a dull ache in my chest to a cold, hard mathematical reality. 30 years of sweat, 70-hour work weeks, and the permanent scars on my hands from the lathe had been converted into silk dresses and first-class seats for people who didn't even want me at the table. Dominic wasn't just letting Harriet spend my money, he was complicit in the quiet erasure of my presence from the very life I was funding. I stared at the Remove User button next to Harriet's name, my finger hovering over the trackpad. The silence of the office was broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second marking the end of my patience. The digital clock on my desk flipped to 12:15, the bold numbers glowing like a silent signal. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had known for 20 years. Arthur Vaughn, my longtime attorney and the only person who knew exactly how much blood and sweat had gone into building my legacy, answered on the second ring. His voice was professional, yet I could hear the immediate shift in his tone when I told him I wasn't calling for a social chat. I didn't waste time with emotional explanations. I simply stated that the financial support for my son was over. Arthur, I need you to initiate a formal 30-day notice for the Lake Union condo. I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat, since the property was held under my holding company and Dominic was merely an occupant by permission, without a formal lease. I knew the legalities. Washington state law required a fair notice period, and I had no intention of breaking the law. I just intended to enforce it. Arthur didn't ask why. He simply noted the instructions, promising that the legal server would deliver the notice to Dominic's door before the sun went down. As soon as I hung up, I initiated the second phase of my plan. I called the concierge at the Grand Wailea Resort in Maui. The representative was incredibly polite, recognizing my diamond status immediately. I informed her that while I was keeping the primary reservation for the villa, I was canceling all the prepaid add-ons. The private yacht charter for sunset cruises, the in-villa personal chef services, the daily luxury spa packages for 4, and the chauffeured limousine service, all of it. Ma'am, those services are non-refundable this close to the date, the concierge warned softly. I told her that was fine. I would rather lose the money than let it fund the comfort of people who viewed me as a mere bank account. If Harriet and her parents wanted to enjoy a world-class vacation, they would have to do it on their own dime. I left the room reservation intact only because I wanted them to arrive there to see the luxury they thought they had stolen, and then realize the gold tap had been turned off. Finally, I opened my banking app for the last time that day. With 3 deliberate taps, I deactivated the authorized user status for both Dominic and Harriet Sterling. I felt a strange cold rush of adrenaline as the screen confirmed cards deactivated. No more designer dresses, no more premium grocery deliveries, and certainly no more hiding behind my credit score to live a life they hadn't earned. I wasn't just cutting them off, I was handed them back their own reality. For 30 years, I had been the foundation keeping their world from shaking. At exactly 12:15, I decided it was time to see if they could stand on their own. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like a woman who had finally stopped paying for her own disappearance. The persistent vibration of my phone against the wooden surface of my desk at 2 in the afternoon was the only sound in the office. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who was calling. At that exact moment, 60 miles south at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the reality of my morning actions was finally colliding with their expectations. I let it ring for 10 long seconds before sliding the bar to answer. The background noise was an immediate assault of frantic terminal announcements, the rolling of suitcases, and the sharp, panicked voice of my son. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Dominic's voice was a jagged edge of disbelief and rage. "We're at the Delta check-in counter and they're telling us the tickets for Harriet and her parents have been voided. My ticket is the only one still active. There's been a massive mistake. You need to call the airline right now and fix this." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the gray Seattle skyline through the window. "There is no mistake, Dominic." I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I made a few adjustments to the itinerary just like you requested in your message this morning." "Adjustments?" He stammered, his breathing heavy. I could hear Harriet in the background, her voice rising in a shrill pitch as she argued with a gate agent about her canceled first-class seat. "Mom, we're standing here with all our luggage. Harriet's parents are humiliated. This is beyond petty even for you. Do you have any idea how much of a scene this is causing?" "I'm simply following your lead." "Honey," I said, ignoring his accusation. "You were very clear at 5:39 this morning. You told me Harriet wanted a private family vacation and that I would feel out of place. So I removed the source of that discomfort myself, and along with me, I removed the funding for anyone who isn't actually my family. Since Harriet made it clear I'm not part of yours, I decided her parents certainly aren't part of mine." There was a stunned silence on the other end, broken only by the muffled sound of a PA system announcing a flight to Honolulu. "But my ticket is still valid." Dominic whispered, his tone shifting from anger to confusion. "Why only mine?" "That's your final lesson, Dominic," I said softly. "I kept your seat because I wanted to see who you really are when the money isn't making the choice for you. You have a ticket to Maui. You have a seat in a villa that is already paid for, but you're the only one invited on my dime. If Harriet and her parents want to join you, they can walk over to that kiosk and use their own credit cards to buy new tickets at the last-minute fare." "Oh, but wait, I forgot. Harriet's cards won't work either, will they?" "You're being cruel," he hissed. "No," I corrected him. I'm being accurate. You wanted a vacation without me, and now you have exactly what you asked for. You just didn't realize that when you uninvite the person paying for the party usually ends. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call, leaving him standing in the middle of a crowded terminal to decide whether he was a husband, a son, or just another person who had run out of other people's money. Silence is often louder than an explosion, and the silence that followed my ended call at the SeaTac terminal was deafening. I sat in my office, imagined the scene as the polished veneer of the Sterling family began to chip away under the harsh fluorescent lights of the airport. Dominic was no longer just a son facing his mother's wrath. He was a man discovering that the pedestal he stood on was made of ice, and it was melting rapidly. Richard Sterling, a man who always prided himself on his stoic upper-class demeanor, was the first to distance himself. I could almost see him adjusting his silk tie, his eyes turning cold as he realized the luxury vacation he had boasted about to his country club friends was vanishing. Dominic, this is an unacceptable domestic embarrassment. Richard stated, his voice devoid of any fatherly warmth or support. He didn't offer to help pay for the tickets. He didn't even put a hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. Instead, he stepped back, physically separating himself and his wife from the mess. We were under the impression that you had your family affairs in order. We do not get involved in the petty squabbles of the Foster household. If the funding is gone, then our presence here is moot. Harriet, the woman who had spent months whispering in Dominic's ear about boundaries and privacy, didn't rush to her husband's defense. There was no us against the world moment. Instead, she stared at her phone with a look of pure, unadulterated panic, not because her husband was hurting, but because she had just received a notification that her boutique purchases had been flagged due to the card deactivation. $8,700 in designer silk and leather was now a debt she couldn't hide. Do you have any idea what this does to my credit, Dominic? She hissed, her voice a low, lethal staccato that probably cut deeper than any shout. She didn't look at him with love, she looked at him with resentment, as if he were a broken tool that was no longer useful. You told me your mother was manageable. You told me we wouldn't have to worry about her. And now I'm standing here like a beggar while my parents watch. How are you going to pay for those dresses? How are you going to fix this? Dominic stood there surrounded by expensive luggage they couldn't check in, watching the woman he had betrayed me for turn into a stranger. He looked for a spark of loyalty in Harriet's eyes, but all he found was a cold calculation of loss. When Richard Sterling signaled for a skycap to take their bags back to the curb to call an Uber, he didn't even look back at Dominic. The private family Harriet wanted so badly apparently didn't include a husband who couldn't pay the bill. The Sterling family moved away like a receding tide, leaving Dominic washed up on the shore of his own choices. He was left alone in the crowded terminal, clutching a single valid ticket to Maui that he couldn't bring himself to use. He had traded 30 years of unconditional support for a seat at a table that was pulled away the moment the check arrived. The elite life he had tried to build on my foundation had collapsed in less than an hour, proving that without my signature, his prestige was nothing more than a hollow echo in a busy airport. The heavy oak door of Arthur Vaughn's law firm closed behind me with a solid final thud that felt like a gavel hitting a bench. Inside his quiet, leather-scented office, I had just spent 2 hours signing the documents that would officially dismantle the future I had spent 3 decades building for a son who no longer deserved it. My signature was firm, written in dark blue ink that looked like a permanent bruise on the crisp white paper. With those few strokes, I officially disinherited Dominic and restructured his trust fund, redirecting every cent into a vocational scholarship for young woodworkers who actually understood the value of hard labor. I wasn't just taking away his money, I was taking away the safety net that had allowed him to be so reckless with my heart. The fallout was immediate and cold. Within an hour of leaving the office, Arthur sent the formal legal notice to Dominic's private email. I could only imagine the look on my son's face when he realized the Bank of Mom was not only closed, but had been entirely liquidated. The consequences didn't stop with a frozen account. Harriet, the woman who had spent months whispering poison about our private family, showed her true colors the moment the gold tap ran dry. She didn't offer a shoulder to cry on or a plan to build a life together from scratch. Instead, she sent Dominic a cold 2-sentence text informing him that she was moving back to her parents' estate for an indefinite period of separation. She claimed she needed time to figure out if their marriage could survive such a traumatic financial shift. Harriet's parents, the Sterlings, were even more ruthless. They didn't just walk away, they treated Dominic like a faulty product they were returning to a store. They blocked his calls and made it clear through their own lawyers that he was no longer welcome at their social functions. Without my wealth to act as his armor, Dominic was suddenly invisible to the people he had traded me for. He was learning in the most brutal way possible that the elite world he craved was a club that required a high entrance fee, and I was the only reason he had ever been allowed inside the gates. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the Seattle skyline, Dominic was left standing in the wreckage of his own making. He tried to call me 22 times, but I watched each notification slide across my screen without feeling the slightest urge to answer. He wasn't crying out for his mother, he was crying out for his lifestyle. The bitter truth finally settled into his bones. He hadn't been abandoned by me. I was the only person who had ever truly stayed. He was being abandoned by the very people he had sacrificed me for, the people who only saw him as a ticket to a luxury Maui villa. For the first time in 32 years, Dominic Foster was truly alone, realizing that when the money disappears, so do the ghosts you mistook for friends. He was no longer a prince in an ivory tower. He was just another man in Seattle standing in the rain clutching a cell phone that was about to be disconnected. The crisp, pine-scented air of the Cascade Mountains was a world away from the toxic dampness of the city I had left behind. I sat on the porch of a small secluded cabin near Mount Rainier, watching the first rays of sunlight pierce through the ancient fir trees. My suitcase for Maui remained unpacked in my garage back in Seattle. I didn't need a tropical beach to find peace. For 30 years I had defined my existence by what I could provide for Dominic, measuring my worth by the thickness of his safety net. As the quiet of the wilderness enveloped me, I realized that by trying to shield my son from every struggle, I had inadvertently stolen his chance to become a man. My sacrifice hadn't been an act of love, it had been a slow-acting poison that paralyzed his character. I took my phone out one last time, looking at the dozens of missed calls and desperate voice messages from the past few days. Dominic's voice had shifted from anger to pleading, then finally to a hollow kind of grief. I didn't block his number, but I had no intention of participating in his rescue. I typed a final message, my fingers steady as the mountain peaks before me. Dominic, the era of my funding is over. Do not call me to ask for help or to complain about Harriet. When you have successfully paid your own rent and utilities for 12 consecutive months with money you earned yourself, then you may call me to discuss being a son again. Until then, you are on your own. I hit send and felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. This journey wasn't about revenge, it was about the restoration of my own dignity. For too long, I had confused being needed with being loved. I had allowed myself to be treated as a silent foundation, expected to hold up the structure of a family that didn't even want me visible in the architecture. Standing on that porch, I finally understood that self-respect is a currency more valuable than any trust fund. I had spent my life building a furniture empire, but my greatest masterpiece was finally learning how to say no to the people who only valued me for my yes. Gillian Foster was no longer a provider, a bank, or a bridge. I was simply a woman who had earned her silence. I watched a hawk circle above the valley, completely independent and fiercely capable, and for the first time in 3 decades, I felt a kinship with it. The lessons I learned at 12:15 that Tuesday afternoon were painful, but they were necessary. True family is not built on biology or obligation. It is built on mutual respect and the willingness to show up when there is nothing to be gained. As I closed my phone and set it face down on the wooden table, I wasn't thinking about the money I had lost or the trip that never happened. I was thinking about the coffee I was about to brew, the book I was about to read, and the life I was finally starting to live for myself. The sun was fully up now, and for the first time in 8 years, the morning belonged entirely to me.